Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Oddly Specific. I'm your host, Meredith Lynch, and I have a good one today for y'all. I teased out there. I said to you guys, do you guys want an episode about Eric Adams? And I got a resounding yes. There are so many things that New Yorkers argue over. They argue over baseball teams. They argue over pizza. They argue over bagels. But one thing y'all seem to agree on is that there's something kind of strange about New York Mayor Eric Adams. And this week, I invite the queen of all things legal on social media to discuss what is happening with Eric Adams. Kiki Monique, aka The Talk of Shame, is an influential content creator and media personality with over 400,000 followers on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. She's known as the CEO of Deep Dives. She's built a reputation for her unorthodox yet genuine and relatable takes on pop culture, true crime, and trending topics. She first gained widespread attention for her viral coverage of the Johnny Depp vs. Amber Heard trial, which was featured in Jezebel. We love Jezebel. It's back, too. Her sharp insights have since been tapped by major outlets, including ABC News, where she contributed to segments and documentaries on the Tom Girardi case, and Bravo TV's Vanderpump Rules Scandival. Most recently, TMZ enlisted Kiki to break down the Sean Diddy Combs scandal in their latest documentary on his indictment. Kiki's presence is felt everywhere, from the red carpets to one-on-one interviews with some of Hollywood's most intriguing figures, including Juliette Lewis, Christina Ricci, Elijah Wood, Andy Cohen, and Harvey Levin. She's also sat down with reality stars and public figures like Rachel Yucatel. We love Rachel, offering her trademark candid commentary. Her work has earned her features in Variety, People Magazine, Daily Mail, and Page Six. Currently, Kiki hosts Reality Checked on SiriusXM's Radio Andy, a live weekly call-in show where listeners engage with her pop culture expertise in real time. Kiki, aka The Talk of Shame, welcome to Oddly Specific.
I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you for being here. I reached out to you and I said, hey, will you do an episode with me? And you were so nice and you said yes. At first I said, let's do Diddy. And then, I don't know. I saw you do Eric Adams content and I thought, you know what? We're going to need to do some Eric Adams because you, to me, are a New Yorker at heart. How do you feel about that statement?
I agree. It's like I wasn't born in New York. I was born in the South, but that was my childhood. And I feel like my growing up adult years, the first time you fall in love, all the things that happen that form you were spent in New York for the other half of my life, my adult life. So then I came to LA and I feel like I'm a New Yorker in LA.
I agree. You have New Yorker energy, which I love. I'm an East Coast queen. I love New York energy. What would you say are the biggest differences between New York and LA, other than the traffic or whatever?
Yeah. I saw an interesting TikTok the other day. It was from a guy who was born and raised in LA and had just moved to New York. And, because I never compare the two. I'm like, there's things you're going to get in LA that you're never going to get in New York and vice versa. And I would never compare the two. And he kind of made an interesting point. He's like, New York is the greatest city. LA is the greatest county. And that's the truth because when you're in LA, every little section has its own little city basically. So it's like when I'm hanging out, in Silver Lake, or if I'm hanging out in, Venice or Santa, it's like there's certain things about it. But in New York, it's like a collective. So I think that what I love is, and what I miss about New York is that whole idea. It's like I can kind of jump on a train, stumble into a bar, maybe go to a restaurant, and you can kind of be all over and it doesn't feel like that. In LA, you go to a neighborhood, you sit in that neighborhood, you stay in that neighborhood, and then you come home.
And, I know you still sort of split your time. So I do have to ask, how has your bagel journey been in LA versus New York? Because you are the bagel queen.
I have found some tasty, good bagels in LA, but it's, you have to go somewhere to get them. They're not close by. I could, New York, I could literally walk downstairs to a bodega and get a decent bagel and it wouldn't be that far. Here, I have to get in an Uber. I have to drive. It's not that easy. They're in very specific locations. So it's like, yeah, I can direct you to some good bagels, but it might not be anywhere near where you live.
Fair enough. What's your bagel order?
So typically, I'm always going to go for an onion bagel with lox, scallion, cream cheese. I do love a caper. I love me some onions. I'll even, I'll do a cucumber every once in a while, but it's usually, that's like my standard. I know if it's a good bagel, if you just have good lox, cream cheese, and capers, genuinely. And that's how I'll test a place. But in LA, again, there's like so many different, you kind of have to get them toasted here, which in New York, I'm a purist. I believe a really good bagel never has to be toasted. But in LA, it's like, oh, you kind of got to get it toasted because it's just a different quality.
Speaking of New York, speaking of people who really shouldn't be eating cream cheese because they allege to be vegans, I'm going to take us through the journey that is Eric Adams, and I've invited Kiki on to talk to us about what is going on with these Eric Adams indictments, because I feel like we're just here, like we hear these things like indictments, and we hear these things like charges, and I think that like we're all getting to this place like where we just are like, that person's guilty. So I think it's really important for us to have these conversations. I say it all the time, 19 felonies, no convictions. Like, you have to have a conversation, because just because something is charged or something's in the news doesn't mean that's actually happening. But I want to walk us through who Eric Adams is for a few minutes, because I think it's super interesting. And Eric Adams is the 110th mayor of New York City. He is a former police officer, and he has been serving as the mayor since 2022. He was born in Brownsville, Brooklyn. His mother was a house cleaner, and his father was a butcher who struggled with alcohol abuse. And when he was about 8 years old, they moved to South Jamaica, Queens. And both of his parents were originally from Alabama. They'd moved to New York in the 1950s. He was able to become a police officer. He eventually graduates from college. He goes on, he gets a master's degree. I mean, when I hear stories like that, I think, okay, well, that's the American dream. Mm-hmm. And I love that.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it seems like he did all the things, quote, right.
Right. So despite having, some gang affiliation as a kid, he kind of removes himself from that. He rebuilds his life. He serves as a New York City Transit police officer and then in the New York City Police Department for 22 years. And he says that he wanted to serve because of the abuse that he suffered by the NYPD in his own youth. And he wanted to encourage reform within the police department from within. Okay. He graduates second in his class in 1984, but I read that very early on, he is eyeing a political career. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean it to say that I think there was a lot of intention behind Eric Adams, and I don't think that's bad. I don't think ambition is ever a bad thing, but I do think it's really interesting to know that like becoming the mayor was always kind of the end game for him, and he did it.
Yeah, and I also think it says a lot because when you do already have those ambitions early on and you start telling people about that, they start giving you advice on how to get there. And sometimes that advice, I think a lot of times, especially when it comes to politics, that advice isn't right or correct. It's just, this is the way things get done, especially in a city like New York.
Right. And you think about it this way, they've only had one other black mayor, David Dinkins. So, it's a huge feat to be it shouldn't be, but it is a huge feat to be the second black mayor in New York City. And he really did, I think, listen to the advice that he was given, because he was told, run for state senate. So he runs for state senate in 2006, and he was kind of like asked to leave the police force. If you kind of really look into it, he was found guilty of basically making statements publicly about the police force that weren't really sanctioned by, his higher ups. And there were a lot of things about like how the structure of, some of the things were about how the structure of racism is like embedded in policing. I mean, like there were things that I was like, oh, wow. Yeah. Agree.
Yeah.
Like hard agree, Eric Adams. But what some people have argued is that was actually part of his strategy. was to kind of position himself in this way, right? He leaves the police force when he's found, I believe, guilty of talking out of turn or without permission. He sort of leaves, but it's kind of like, well, would he have also been asked to leave? So he runs for state senate, he wins, he serves 4 terms, and then he's elected borough president in Brooklyn. And he represents the 20th Senate District, which is like a pretty big district in Brooklyn. And then he announces that he's going to run for office in November of 2020. And he runs at a time when the crime rate is rising in New York City. And his background of being a former police officer is that he's like, well, I know the system, right? But I'm also a Black man. And I also advocated for reform. So he really toes this line of, I'm running to get the crime rate down, but I'm also running with the experience of, being a Black kid who was, abused by the police. So I think at the time too, it felt like, crime was higher in New York at that time.
Yeah. And I remember I had just left for LA at this time, like right before. And it was interesting because I was kind of like, I'm not going to vote. I'm moving, I'm moving to this new city. I'm worried about my new town, But I remember the people who, my friends who still live there. And, one friend in particular who I know, she's a, staunch Democrat. She would never vote Republican. And she was all like, I'm all about Eric Adams. And I remember thinking like, I didn't know anything about this man. I just know he was a cop, or he used to be a cop. So I actually didn't know what political affiliation he had, because I was just associating cop with like a certain sort of like stereotype that I had in my head. But I was like, okay, if she's all for him, I believe in her, because she's always been on like the quote right side of politics, I would say.
Well, it's so funny you say that, because he ends up rising to the top of all these Democrats. And I think in part because he gets so much fundraising, but he's up against this guy. Have you ever seen this guy, Curtis Sliwa?
Yes.
Sliwa? Okay, he always wears like a maroon like felt jacket, and I don't know.
Yeah,
if it's
he's
like
part of the what is it? The Guardian Angels, right?
Yes.
He's like the leader of the Guardians Angels. Yes.
Yeah, and the other day I was talking a little shit about Eric Adams, as I do, because we'll get to some of that. But like someone kept tagging him, Curtis, in the video, and I was like, you know what? I don't know if I can handle Curtis. I feel like listen, I'm not an Eric Adams fan, but I don't know that like it's not always that like just because you don't like one person doesn't mean that you now automatically want to flip to the other side.
Yeah, exactly.
Although I was looking at his content and I was like, he makes some good points about Eric Adams, but I think that's pretty much where it stops for us. So yeah, he runs on this whole idea of like, I'm gonna tackle crime. And to be fair, I just looked up the statistics. Crime is down in New York City.
Okay.
But crime is down nationwide. I think it's one of those things where it's like, I don't necessarily know that it's the chicken or the egg. It's just like, I don't know. What do you think?
That's the thing. I think inherently there was going to be a lot of crime in 2020. Millions of people were out of work, and there was no prospect of work returning at any time. People had to steal, whether it was steal diapers, steal food. Like, people were doing things that were outside their norm. So we were getting criminals that weren't normally criminals, right? So inherently, as the economy picked back up, of course, crime is going to go down, because people who were like stealing from Target are like, I don't need to steal from Target anymore, Right,
exactly. And so do I think that, Mayor Adams could have had any impact on crime getting lower in New York City? Sure. But I think it's to your point, right? Like, what changed about what life was like in 2020 versus what life is like in 2024? And I will say, like, good God, does everything have to be locked up? Let people steal. Let people steal.
I just want a razor without having to like go get the little cashier up front. I just want some deodorant. Just want a razor. Just want some body wash. Like,
people who live in like Montana, which like if you're listening to this and you live in Montana, shout out first of all. Thank you. I don't think that I don't know if Montana is a state that I've ever gotten a download in, but no, I've gotten downloads in all 50 states. I'm no Kiki, but But I don't know that people know the struggle that we are going through here in Los Angeles to get a stick of fucking deodorant. Can you please
No.
explain to someone what it's like to go to Target right now?
I don't even go into stores anymore, to be honest. I actually just do app deliveries because it's so frustrating of just like going into an aisle and every aisle is just a plastic wall with these locks on them. And all you can do is look into them and say, okay, aisle 7. Okay, can you come down aisle 7? Or you can either push a button, or if they don't come, you got to go find someone at the register. They have to leave their post to come unlock it. Then you got to go to the next aisle. It's almost like you need to drag them around the store, but they can't do that because they have one person working. And it's just like, it's the most, and you just feel so like, do you not, like, I just want to be in a place, a normal person that can do normal shopping. And just because there's a few bad apples, I have to be treated like a criminal. It makes me feel annoyed.
Right. And also too, like, I feel like it's a little bit of like a violation of like my right to shop on my own. Like in the sense that, okay, the other day I was at Target and I wanted to get deodorant, but like I wanted to smell them. Right?
Yes.
And so you like just our Montana listener, I want you to know that I had to stand at the Target deodorant section with like a 16-year-old kid, okay, which is not his fault. Well, he opened it up and then I like had to take the secret deodorants out, sniff them, and then he was like, "Which one do you want?" I'm like, "I don't know yet. I don't know." Okay?
Yeah.
Like I'm a
this
millennial.
is going to take time, kid. Yes.
Right?
Like, I need things to do. Like,
so anyway, it is tough, but I will say I think more stuff is locked in New York than in LA.
oh, really?
Yeah, when I was there the other day, I mean, we're locking M&Ms.
Oh, God. It's just too much. It's just
I
so
know.
much.
Let them steal. Anyway, like I don't want anyone to get hurt, but I just, if somebody wants M&Ms, go ahead. So Mayor Adams is elected, and I think at first people are excited. And by people, I mean the fact that Jessica Seinfeld, one of my enemies, put up a status like that was like, "I'm excited that our new mayor's a vegan," and we'll get to that. But like people seemed kind of excited at the time. Like he really sort of brought this like, he's from New York. People were really fed up with de Blasio. Like that was rough. And so he becomes mayor, and I think pretty quickly people start to see the like, "Oh, that's interesting." Do you remember any
he
of
was
this
like
discourse?
party. I just remember hearing about him partying a lot. I remember talking to people in New York, and I think he'd be out with French Montana a lot at like these like hottest nightclubs that like I haven't even been in. And I guess he's single. I mean, I don't know. Like I didn't even know much about him, but I guess he's single because it seems like he's just out partying. I don't know much about his status, which if he is single, it's interesting that nobody cares because if it had been a woman, we know.
Oh my God, it'd be the biggest thing in the world, right?
Yeah.
And so I did look it up.
Like,
He has a girlfriend.
Okay.
He has never been married, which if that was a woman, that would be such a red flag to people, right? And then he does have a child from a previous relationship. So, and he's grown. He's, like in his 20s, maybe early 30s. It does say that he has a girlfriend, but you're right. Like if that was a woman, I mean, people have given Kamala Harris so much grief for not having, and I realize Eric Adams has a child, but like so much grief over these kind of things.
Yeah. I mean, we just saw that Virginia, I don't know what position he's running for, but he's running for something in Virginia, and he borrowed his friend's family to take a family photo. It's like, this is how much we have to have fake families because you care so much about whether somebody has someone in their house every night and they've procreated. Like, give me a break.
Well, Eric Adams might have picked, the conventional path and that he does have a child, and that's nice, and I'm sure he loves his child. But he does have an unconventional approach to a few things. And one of those things happened in December of 2023. And as a former New Yorker, I'm really excited to share this statement with you. When asked to describe New York in one word in December of 2023, Eric Adams said, "New York." And then went on to say, "This is a place where every day you wake up and you could experience everything from a plane crashing into our trade center to a person who is celebrating a new business that's open." Wow.
I mean, I guess it is a factual statement. I mean, it is a true statement.
Yeah, he has a bit of a weird relationship with the truth, but like I feel like in 2024, if you're going to ask someone like, what is it about New York? You could say, the pride that New Yorkers have, even in the days after 9/11. I don't think that you would say like anything could happen. A plane could crash into the towers. Like,
yeah,
whoa.
like we try to like, we remember, but we also like don't like to like remember that can happen. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, yeah, that's another point. It's like, oh, that was a kind of a, thank God, and hopefully not a one-time thing, right?
Yeah. I hope that was like, a once in a lifetime. I hope I never experience that again. Yes.
And then on the other hand, we have the celebrating of a small business that's opened.
Which is also just a lie, because I'm sorry, New Yorkers do not celebrate small business. They want you in an office. They want all that empty office space. They want you sitting in that cubicle. They don't want you being an independent entrepreneur. They spend so many taxes to small businesses. They do not want to celebrate your small business.
Yeah, they're really like, when I was in New York, I think there's small businesses here and there, but like a lot of New York has become like, the salad place, the, a Nordstrom's pop-up, like, thing. It's not
when I moved there, I came from the South. When I moved there, 7-Eleven didn't exist. And I remember thinking like how much I love Slurpees and how I was going to die, that I was never going to have a Slurpee again. But I also felt kind of cool that I lived in a place that didn't have 7-Elevens, because where I grew up, 7-Eleven, there was 3 like in my, within like a mile of each other. Right. And I thought it was so cool. And I don't even remember how many years later. And I remember it was announced the first 7-Eleven was coming to New York. And I remember I go, the city's dead. I was like, we're done here. And then like, I loved hanging Lower East Side, Brooklyn, and, all these businesses were going because the rent was too damn high. Remember, the rent was too damn high.
My God,
who drove around in his car. And it was just like the rent was too damn high. And I was like, the only people that can afford these rents are going to be chains. And that's what you start,
right.
You started seeing all these chains pop up. So, yeah.
Yeah. So Eric, I don't think his focus has been small businesses, but his focus has been the nightlife. He likes to boogie. And there's been a lot of controversy. You talked about it earlier, is that he's always out. And I can't tell you like how many times when I post Eric Adams content, and I don't know if it's just like the same people or whatever, but people will be like, I see him all the time. Like I see him out all the time. He's always at the and I mean, here's the bottom line. He's not 25. He's like mid 60s, I think. And I'm not saying that's old, and he looks great, all that kind of stuff. But like, I mean, Kiki, I'm tired.
I don't even like going to the club. Like, the only way I'm like going to the club is if someone has invited me, they have a VIP table, I can sit like,
right.
And I'll go like maybe once in a blue moon. I'm like, otherwise, like, catch me at home or maybe at a dive bar.
Right. And this guy's got to be up early the next day to do, probably get indicted. And so it's just been kind of interesting to see his affiliation to partying. And then another thing that I have found really interesting about him is that, he did adopt a plant-based diet in 2016 when he was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, that's great. I love that for him. And, that meant for him eliminating animal products, of course, processed sugar, salt, oil, all that kind of stuff. So it has come out that he has been seen multiple times in public eating fish. And, he has admitted that he occasionally eats fish. And so he seems to have a very interesting relationship with the truth, which we're going to get into when we talk about these indictments. And so I just think that's sort of, I don't know about you, but just because you and I are both like, I'm no Kiki, but you and I both we've caught some things before. We've picked up on some things.
Yeah.
And I always notice that when someone lies about the little things, it's just a tell. Not that we all haven't lied and said like, oh, I loved that dinner, or oh yeah, like whatever. But like when you lie about being vegan, that's a tell for me. What about for you?
No, it's so funny that you say that, because the one person that stands out, it was a person I know who she just lied about every little thing. And like, she swore up and down. She was just like, just so upfront about everything. But I was like, I felt like I was always catching her in lies. And one of the things she would always say is like how she was, vegan, vegetarian, but she would always be eating like fish. And I swear we were at a barbecue one day and I swear I saw her eat a hamburger. And I was just like, but she always would tell everywhere we went, she was just like, I'm a vegan, I'm a vegetarian. And I was like, didn't you just ate? I just saw you eat fit.
Right.
So,
and
yeah,
it's
it's kind
who
of
are
interesting.
you messing with? And also too, it's like where there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah.
Right. And also, like, I'm your friend. You can tell me. Like, no one's not going to like Eric Adams if he's like, oh, I'm actually more of a pescatarian. Like, we'd be like, okay, that's fine. New York isn't, like, as crazed health conscious as LA.
Yeah.
So it's not even like that would go over really well here in LA. But, that's a whole other thing that we could spend hours on talking about. Although in ways I think New Yorkers, like, are healthier because they're walking a lot more.
Oh yeah, like they get way more steps in, so like for that they won't die of like a heart attack probably as soon. We're driving around in our cars inhaling all of this like pollution. but eating kale, very good produce here.
That is true. We do have great produce, and it's still peach season here in New Yorkers. So yeah, we still have stone fruits and you don't. What you do have, New York, though, is a really helpful video that I did make Kiki watch before she came on today. I said, you have to watch this bizarre YouTube video of Eric Adams, and I'm going to invite everybody to watch it. But basically, in 2013, Eric Adams hired what I believe is his cousin who had never held an Android before, because I have a hard time believing this was filmed on an iPhone. Hired him to film a video that is basically, it's called How to Search Your Own House. And I would say Eric's target demographic is parents who are concerned about their children potentially using drugs or having a handgun, which are very normal concerns to have and very valid concerns to have. The video, however, is a video of Eric teaching you how to sweep your house via his own house, which, by the way, is a fucking weird house, okay? Like, it's a very, very weird interior decorating. And I would just love, Kiki, to get your thoughts on the video, because you did watch it. Thank you for watching.
No, I watched it twice because it was the funniest thing. I won't even call it an SNL skit. I'll call it a Mad TV skit because that's how odd and weird and hilarious it was. Because, he basically took his police skills and he's like, this is how you raid and search your kid's house. And it was so interesting because you're trying to figure out what age kids are these, because like where we were going with so many different places. What first struck me though was like, he wanted to let parents know, tell your kids, this is your house, this is your domain, and that they do not have any First Amendment rights in this house. And I kept thinking, they don't have freedom of speech? Like, what does that have to do with the raid? And he kept talking, and I was like, oh, he means the Fourth Amendment, search and seizure. Yes. But he kept saying First Amendment, and I was like, this man is a cop, and he doesn't even know the Constitution. I don't know the Constitution, but nobody expects me to know the Constitution or the Amendment.
My listeners will know, you guys know I'm obsessed with the Third Amendment. Kiki, are you familiar with the Third Amendment?
No.
Well, we've got your First Amendment. Obviously, that's freedom of speech. You and I are quite familiar with that one. Second Amendment is the right to bear arms. Okay, fine. Third Amendment, the quartering of troops.
See.
No officer in time of war or peace shall ever be forced to live in your home. Basically, Kiki, the United States government cannot tell you that a member of the military has to live in your house. Aren't you so glad that that's number 3?
I just nobody's ready for this conversation, but we need to redo the Constitution. But okay, that's another day.
We got to reorder it. No, I've been talking about this. The fact that that's number 3, okay? That comes before the right to a speedy trial or plead the fifth. I'm sorry, who needed to evict a veteran? on the Continental
clearly
Congress.
it was a big issue back then. I mean, that's what I'm saying. That was a major concern and priority for them. Not so much for us anymore. Hopefully.
Eric Adams probably knows that one.
Yeah.
It's like, you're not going to have any veterans staying in this house. And he then proceeds to like go through the room and find all of the different paraphernalia that might be in there. And the other thing that is weird, to your point, is like, whose room is this? Because like this room has everything from cologne, where he's like, there might be bullets behind the cologne, to a doll where he's like, this is a great place to hide cocaine.
I mean, I think between him, he lifted a picture frame. He's like, yeah, bullets, and he keeps finding paraphernalia and being like, does this mean that they have an illegal handgun? Does this straw mean that they're doing drugs? Maybe not, but it can invoke conversation. If I find bullets and straws and entire baggies of cocaine in my child's room, we're not going to have it's not invoking a conversation. Like I might turn you in. You might have to go to jail.
Yes.
The best is like, he pulls out a baby doll. Cause I'm like, okay, so this kid has baggies of cocaine and straws, but also a doll that they're using to hide drugs. And he wanted to say that it was a secret place. And he said it was a secretion. Like, this man, everything.
His cousin also edited it. Probably like, what would be like the worst editing thing that you could edit something in? Because like, it's definitely edited, but it's so bad. And then also too, for no reason whatsoever, like there's the opening where he's outside and he talks about what he's going to take us. And then he brings us in. And for some reason, his cousin put like classical music over it.
I know, the music was so like, it was like haunting, creepy, scary.
Well, even though I would love to indict Eric Adams on that YouTube video, which actually though like might be the most positive contribution he's ever made to the city of New York, because it is funny, like you gotta give him that, and unintentionally. Could you walk us through the charges that he has been indicted on? And also, what does it mean to be indicted?
So I'm not a lawyer, but I got my judge degree. I've spent a lot of time in courtrooms, but essentially, a grand jury is brought together, and this grand jury, and I think it also depends on the size of the city, but like for a place like New York, I think you get like a grand jury of like 23 people or something like that. And it's all secretive. Grand juries have to be so secretive, and the defense team doesn't even know who is being brought in. It's just the prosecutor that is there, that is presenting the evidence that they have. And this prosecution, basically it's kind of like a trial, but again, only with the prosecutor, which seems kind of weird, but I don't know. I guess that's it's like weird. But they present this evidence to the grand jury. And if the grand jury says that there is enough evidence to charge this person, then a formal indictment will be issued. And it doesn't have to be like in juries, it has to be like 100%, like of the jury
to find
has
someone guilty. Right, yes, yep.
But in this, it just has to be preponderance. So I think like 51%, like a majority of the people on the grand jury have to find there's enough evidence to indict. That's what's so funny about this. It's like, I love reporting on this stuff and, watching these cases go down. But I think inherently I've always been a person that's like, fuck the man. Like, I don't
Totally.
like the government. I don't. And so it is a little weird to be sort of cheering on, because I also know that, especially when someone like the Southern District of New York is a stepping stone in your career, and I've heard so many different statistics. It's like their conviction rate is like 95, 98. I've heard it's high 90% of that. They mostly get, high conviction rate. So it's like, when you're in that position, you're going to find cases that you want to win, but that are also high profile, that make a name for yourself so that one day you can go on to be whatever your aspiration. I don't know if it's being on the Supreme Court or maybe being president. We don't know, right? Whatever your political aspirations are. So it always is weird to me, because I do think that a lot of people in politics are corrupt, but I think that's because of the system that we have. So it's not surprising. It's really easy to find very public figures to always take down, because it's like finding a good billionaire. They just don't exist, right?
Right. No, that's such a good point. And I think it's really important that you say, it doesn't have to be 100% of the grand jury that thinks there's a case there. So what kind of bias ends up coming into play? I guess my question to you is, Do you feel that though they pick cases that they think they can win too? Like they're not gonna like do this shoot like, oh my God, there's a shot in the dark.
Absolutely. They're going to pick cases they can win because, you know, they that's why they can maintain like their status. I just think that there's so many cases that can be won by the nature of our system. I think there's people who are low level who can get away with stuff for years because they will, you know, it's not going to move the political needle for that U.S. attorney to go after them. But yeah, I think they're always going to go after cases that there's a lot of evidence for. And I mean, Eric, when you read the indictment and you see all the like the text messages and the exhibits that they have, it's like it was like 101. Like he didn't know what he was doing. It seemed like I wouldn't have left the trail of evidence allegedly that he seemed to have left that was presented in this indictment.
Well, I guess that brings me to, first of all, just to clarify, and I think this is really important, is just because someone is indicted doesn't mean they will be found guilty. And I think that's really important to say. Like people are like, Eric Adams is going to prison. And it's like, well, are you like writing fan fiction or, you know, like that, just because someone's indicted doesn't mean that. So could you walk us through what he is being charged with?
Yeah, I mean, it really centers a lot. I mean, it's basically it's bribery, it's conspiracy, it's fraud, and it really centers a lot around like illegal campaign donations because like that's the thing. When you're running for a campaign, your money has to be clean. You have to declare it on certain forms when you submit. And it's those declarations that will get people caught up every time. And essentially, what is being alleged is Eric had a close relationship with Turkish officials. Now,
that's to me, it's so random. No
so
offense
random.
to everybody listening from Turkey. I love you guys, but like it is very random to me. And one of the things I think that people at first were pushing is they were like, well, New York is a very diverse city. And I'm like, yes, that is very true. But like, how big is the Turkish population?
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that you need to be working this closely with Istanbul.
Yeah. It was very specific. And so, you know, he was getting essentially heavily discounted travel to like, you know, Four Seasons, Istanbul, we saw a lot of, and just like, you know, these first class, business class airfares that were being, again, heavily discounted. You know, I think it was like $100,000, you know, over $100,000 in discounts to kind of get these luxury vacations. And then it was sort of a quid pro quo that he would then help them on the other end. And one of the major things that was being helped or alleged of being helped is the Turkish government was building a Turkish consular building, and they were having the Turkish president, I believe, come for the opening, and they wanted it to pass the fire inspection so that the, you know, a Turkish president could be there, but it had so many violations, the fire inspector was like, no. And so they, because they had the relationship, said, you know, get him to do this. And allegedly, Eric basically threatened the, you know, FDNY. I don't know what position. It was like the FDNY, chief of FDNY, I believe it was, essentially threatened his job and said, you know, get this passed for inspection or you're going to be out of a job, allegedly. The inspector wasn't really down with it, but then did sign off on something that allowed it to be open, even with these violations. So it's like, that's the thing that's messed up. It's like, this is a 37-story building in New York City.
Right.
And as Eric had it said himself, could be any day that a plane just crashes into a building, right? So
like, we do have to take this seriously. This is, you know, this is not just like, oh, I let you have a party or something. Like, it's, you know, I gave you a permit to have a party on a street that normally doesn't have a party or something, which is, you know, we see those kind of things in City Hall all the time, right? Like, I mean, look up any big city and you're going to see a lot of these kickbacks and favors, and you make a phone call and the thing goes away, whatever. But yeah, like, this is pretty big to be like, oh no, please. Because let's say, listen, I'm a worst case scenario kid. I can't help it. Let's say like the unthinkable happens.
Yeah.
Who's at fault?
Exactly. I mean, if there's a fire in this building one day, years down the road, and then it comes out that it's because it never passed inspection and it was all because Eric Adams was getting discounted airfare to the Four Seasons in the Istanbul, that's crazy. Like someone could die because you wanted a trip to Istanbul. That's crazy. But it's also funny that you brought up the parties because it also came out after this that Sabrina Carpenter, her video that was done in a church in New York was sort of the impetus for investigating Eric Adams, because people were like, how did she get a permit to film this music video in this church? And then they were like, oh, because this guy. And so it's kind of, sometimes it is just a little party. And that little party turned into like a bigger investigation. And then obviously they started seeing these Turkish officials were allegedly sort of, padding the amount of money that was going into the campaign contributions. Yeah, the U.S. attorney alleges that Adams improperly obtained this $10 million through taxpayer funded programs, I guess. The Turkish donations at the core of the indictment yielded $10 million in Adams. I mean, that's like, for campaign financing, $10 million, I mean, that's in private dollars. It's a no-no. Like, you're not allowed to do these things. So, I don't even think the travel was the big part of it, but it's kind of the funniest part of it, right? Because when you're reading through these text messages that were going, they never name any of the other people in the indictment other than Eric. They always say like businessman one, or assistant, or, they have these because obviously people are going to flip on him, right? They want to like get out of this. But when you read some of these text messages, it's like, does the mayor feel good? Yes. And all of this stuff. And it was like they were positioning him to be like the next president. Like, I think they thought they were going to have this connection and eventually this man would make it to the White House and then they would have, a hand in the White House. Again, I don't know what Turkey wanted to do with this allegedly, but
they were like, you know what? Russia has Trump. We're going to become really good friends with this. We couldn't get him, but we met this guy, Eric Adams, at a nightclub at Cipriani's. He's just great, you guys. He gets it. And like, I mean, on the one hand, I think this happens a lot more than people know. That is, on the one hand, unfortunate, but then on the other hand, perhaps, this is just the way that some of this political stuff happens. And I don't think every single politician operates like this. I really don't. But I do think that level of politics can get really weird.
I agree. I just think that you reach a certain point. Watching that movie, is it VP, the one about Dick Cheney that was played? Watching that, first of all, it disturbed me. It actually made me so jaded about politics in general. But it's like a lot of times you realize that like a lot of these guys get into it and they're like, I don't even care what side I'm on. I'm going with the side that's going to get me the furthest. And sometimes to get the furthest, you start doing things and saying things you never would. I mean, again, look at JD Vance. I think
perfect
his position
example
has changed because he has a chance to be vice president. So it switches things up.
Yeah, I think, last week we were so lucky. We had on Senator Ed Markey, who is a Massachusetts senator, and he's really going up against corporations in for-profit corporations in healthcare, which we love here. And he's like one of the, he's one of the good guys. He has made a career of fighting up against big business, and he really hasn't been able to be bought. And you think of a Bernie Sanders or somebody of that nature. But I think there are a lot of people who, in order to advance, they need to pay to play, and they are willing. And, it happens all the time, politicians doing each other favors, or they might vote on one thing one way or whatever. But with JD Vance, I said this the first time that I really started watching him. I said he would be a Democrat if he thought that it would make him more money. Mm-hmm. He would be up there, like he could be Tim Walz if he thought that was where the money was. But at the time that he came up, he's like, I think he's 40. And at the time that he came up and he was in law school, and like it would have been the Bush administration, very Republican. I think he was meeting a lot of wealthy people in law school. And he was like, okay, that's the way to the money.
Yeah. I mean, Meredith, look, do you know how many times I've like sat there on my platform and been like, felt stagnant and been like, you know what? I'm just going to start going MAGA. because I know I could triple my following because I'd be a unicorn and they love that unicorn, right? And it's like, I get it. I don't, but like then I have to look at myself every day.
Well, that's the difference, I think, between you and a JD Vance, right? And, this is actually a really good lesson. I know a lot of people on here listen and also make content and stuff. When you are not being authentic, even if you think like, oh, no, there's no way people wouldn't figure this out. People can tell. People can pick up on it. So, like, this thing with JD Vance, like, I never felt that way about Mike Pence. I think Mike Pence, like, he believes what he says. That's his thing, right? You can tell when it's not fully in someone, and they might not even realize how much they're faking it. But, like, to your point, it's like, yeah, you could flip and, like, do other content. But there would be just, I think, enough people in yourself who would realize that's not authentically me. And that's why, Kiki, you've been so successful, is because you are so authentically yourself. And a lot of people jump on the bandwagon of content creation and they create a persona, and it's okay to like have some boundaries, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't come on and be yourself, it's never going to go long-term for you. Yeah. That's just my personal advice.
Yeah.
Not to you, because you don't need it. You're light years ahead of me.
No, I agree. And, JD, I agree. I don't think he is authentically himself. I do think Eric Adams is authentically himself. And that's what's so interesting about him, because I also believe that a lot of what he learned, like we live in a society where we know cops are corrupt. Not all cops. There are cops that are corrupt and they exist. So like, it shouldn't surprise us if he grew up in a system where it's like, okay, I know I have to do this and this, and he ends up in a political career where it's like, that's the norm. And here's the thing. I'm not going to make excuses for this man. Anyone who is doing corrupt things deserves to be punished. Totally. My problem is I feel like we get distracted because Eric Adams, in the grand scheme of my life, because I don't even live in New York, isn't going to make an impact. What is going to make an impact is a Clarence Thomas. And when Clarence Thomas has been accused of doing the same things that Eric Adams has, I have a problem, because Clarence affects my life every day. Eric, I don't really give a shit about. Let's be real.
No, that's a really good point. And, at what level of government are people held accountable for these things? And are they only held accountable when they are a squeaky wheel that people don't like, right?
Exactly.
I don't think anybody wants to go after Clarence Thomas because it's like, well, he's not in an electable position. If he was, I think it would be very different. And even though I am not pro Eric Adams, I will say like, okay, like, let's just look at the fact that they say he has had these dealings since beginning in 2014, when he was still the Brooklyn borough president, which, like, by the way, slay Eric Adams that you were like getting these flights when you were just the Brooklyn borough president. But my point is, even though I am not Team Eric Adams, I don't disagree that the timing of these and his reelection are probably aligned.
Yeah.
So, as we wrap up our time here, I'd love to know, what do you think, what comes next for Eric Adams and, prison, jail time? People are throwing things around. Like, I don't think he's going to end up in jail. But
no, I mean, that's the thing. I think with all the charges, I think he's facing up to like something like 45 years in prison. I don't think he is going to serve 45 years in prison. I don't even know if he'll serve a day in prison, because the indictment is one thing. This actually going to trial, going through discovery, getting a jury. Like, there's so many steps to getting a conviction. Again, I know the SDNY has a very high conviction rate, but like, also, how often do they plea people out? I think that there's so many different routes this can take before it gets to Eric Adams going to prison. So do I think his political career is over? Yeah. I mean, like, I think that's probably done.
Like, probably as it should be, since, like, he's proved himself to, not be very truthful.
But I think he can still go on to be an entrepreneur. Like, I think there's people who have ended their political careers who've still going on to just like have different careers. Like, that's the thing. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I think about this a lot, and I kind of wonder, like, sometimes why these people want to be in politics. Like, I have a thing in my stand-up right now that's like all about how, like, why does Joe Biden, well, this was, before he stepped down, why do you still want to be the president? This looks exhausting.
yeah.
Like, why do you want to be the mayor of New York? Like, I mean, I get there's the power aspect of it, but like, you don't make, it's not the most money that you can make.
I keep thinking about that too, because nothing about it sounds appealing to me in any way, shape, or form. But I think a lot of them, honestly, I think there's just this inherent, like, they want to make change. I do think that so many of them inherently are people that want to make change. And then I just think there's people that once you get a taste of what it feels like to have a little bit of power, like, I don't think we've seen, like, I think you could be in a room and see a change happen with like just a meeting. And it's like so powerful when you see it happening behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And it becomes like a drug, because I think that's what happens. It's just like all these people behind closed doors that you're meeting. And it's just that sort of knowing how things operate behind the scenes and making the world turn in ways that people never see. I think that's kind of, look, it's the same reason I like gossip. Half the gossip I know I can't talk about, but I love knowing it. It's like, I just love having the juice on people. And if I see them in public being like, I know your secrets.
That's true. I mean, even if they're not famous, I'm like, I'm down to know your gossip. Guys, send me gossip. I love other people's gossip. What is your favorite, crime thing that you have covered?
I think that, I don't know, I like so many for so different reasons, but one I am excited about, this one will be good. Sarah Silverman is trying to depose Mark Zuckerberg for the AI stuff, because she, like, I know that she had filed a lawsuit. I can't remember exactly who exactly was when, but I think it was Facebook, for basically like utilizing like her materials, her books and stuff in AI in order to teach AI. And I saw a thing that she was trying to get Mark Zuckerberg deposed. To me, that would be interesting, right? Like,
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, my friend, where can people find you?
I can always be found on social media, on Instagram and TikTok at The Talk of Shame. I'm doing my YouTube channel now, which is also The Talk of Shame. And obviously, if you have Sirius XM, you can listen to me every Monday on Reality Checked, live on Radio Andy, talking about all the reality stuff that I do.
Kiki, thank you so much for joining the podcast. It's good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.